Hi guys, Ricky Pope here, and this week on the Christian Nerd Unite podcast, I'm once again joined by Roland Mann, former editor of Malibu and Marvel Comics, and currently editor-in-chief for Silverline Comics, plus scripture and nerdy news, and we'll get to all of that right after this.
Hey guys, this is Ashley Cox from Fangirling Over Jesus. At FOJ, we believe in hope and light in the darkness and that you are not alone. We seek to unite and celebrate the intersection of the gospel and our favorite fandoms, and we get to do this through our social media, our podcast devotional, and our cosplay and fashion. And you can find links to all of that through our website, www.fangirlingoverjesus.com, through our social media at Fangirlingoverjesus, wherever you get your podcasts, and on Etsy. See you online.
And lead me on to your kingdom come, surrendering, let your work be done. My life I give for the glory of your Son.
I really appreciate everyone who watches and listens every week to the Christian Nerd Unite podcast. We're part of the Christian Nerd HQ podcast network, and we drop new content every day. Christian Nerd Unite on Mondays, Tatooine Sons on Tuesdays, Fangirling Over Jesus on Wednesdays, the Reverend and the Reprobate on Thursdays, and the Speaking Nerdy podcast every Friday. Go to ChristianNerdHQ.com to follow all the podcasts and check out the Christian Nerd HQ YouTube channel for even more great content. Well, let's start with some scripture. Zechariah 4, 6-10. Then he said to me, "This is what the Lord says to Zerubbabel. It is not by force nor by strength, but by my Spirit, says the Lord of heaven's armies. Nothing, not even a mighty mountain, will stand in Zerubbabel's way. It will become a level plain before him. When Zerubbabel sets the final stone of the temple in place, the people will shout, 'May God bless it, may God bless it.' Then another message came to me from the Lord. Zerubbabel is the one who laid the foundation of this temple, and he will complete it. Then you will know that the Lord of heaven's armies has sent me. Do not despise these small beginnings, for the Lord rejoices to see the work begin, to see the plumb line in Zerubbabel's hand." That line, do not despise these small beginnings. Zechariah is seeing a vision of the second temple being built. And many would moan and complain that it was not as grand as the first temple that Solomon had built. But God said not to worry. He had bigger things in store. This small second temple is where Jesus preached. This small place would be a site of the greatest happenings in the New Testament. We might see it as small, but God sees the big picture. We need to take this advice as well. Maybe our ministry seems small, but we're only seeing the temporal, what is here and now. We can't see God's grand design yet. So I want to encourage you to keep moving forward in your life and in your ministry. Don't worry about how small it seems. God has something bigger in store, and I, for one, will be happy to have been just a small part of it. And I hope you will be too. Now for some nerdy news. Gran Turismo comes in number one at the domestic box office with a very low $17.3 million, just nudging out Barbie at second place with $17.1 million. Barbie has now passed to the Super Mario Bros. For the domestic box office leader for 2023. Blue Beetle, Oppenheimer, and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles round out the top five. Dune Part 2, that was originally scheduled to hit theaters on November 3rd of this year, has now been moved back to March 15th of 2024. Many speculate that the delay is mostly due to the SAG-AFTRA strike and not having the actors able to promote the film if the strike continues. Because of this move, Warner Brothers has also announced that other films will be delaying their release dates. Godzilla X Kong, The New Empire, is moving from March 15th to April 12th of next year. And also being delayed is The Lord of the Rings, The War of the Rohirrim animated film. It's going to move from April 12th, 2024 to December 13th of 2024. Two well-known stars of television passed away this past week. Game show host Bob Barker has died at the age of 99. Barker's best known as the host of The Price is Right, being there for over 35 years before retiring in 2007. Arlene Sorkin, who played Calliope Jones on the NBC soap opera Days of Our Lives, passed away at 69. But nerds may know her better as the original voice actress for the DC comic character Harley Quinn, often working opposite Mark Hamill's The Joker. They will both be missed. Well, this week we are continuing our interview with Roland Mann, the former editor of Malibu and Marvel Comics, working on titles like Dinosaur for Hire and X-Mutants and the Ultraverse, and currently running a Kickstarter for his independent imprint, Silverline Comics. If you missed the first half, make sure you go back and listen. Now, let's get right into our interview.
So she just said, unless you can figure out a way to actually make money with this, you can't do this anymore. So I gave it up.
Wow.
Yeah.
And then, so what did you do then at that point? Were you doing freelance writing, or did you just go into, go get the job? What did that?
I was depressed for a little while. And so
I can imagine.
I sat around and did nothing for a few months. And then I decided I would be a teacher. And
okay.
So I went back to school and got an advanced degree and started teaching. So, which is still what I do for my day job today. I'm a university instructor.
Very cool. And what do you teach right now?
I teach creative writing.
Oh, okay, great.
I do, yeah. So
very fitting.
I was glad, because I could have ended up, and not that I would have minded so much, but I could have ended up, teaching English comp or sophomore literature or something like that. But I'm very fortunate that I get to teach creative writing, and I get to teach comic book writing a lot. So
very cool. So talk to us a little bit about that. So what is that like, getting to teach people how to write comic books?
It's frustrating and exciting at the same time. My class is part of a program that they're required to take my class. So so what it is, there's a track that students have to take. It's like, if you want to get a creative writing degree, you have to take these classes in order to do that, right? Okay. So it's my class, it's an animation class, it's a screenwriting class. There's a lot of different entertainment kind of classes.
Kind of to give everybody a broad experience of what creative writing can look like.
Exactly. Okay. Game writing, and so most of the students that come through my class have zero interest in comics, and that's the frustrating part. Is I would say probably 90% of them come through and they're just like, this is a required class, dude. I got to be here. I'll read your comics because you're gonna make me read them, but it's just a required class. I'm gonna do the bare minimum I can to get out of here. Right? That's most of them. I have some that come in that have great attitudes. They're like, hey man, comic books, this sounds fun. I haven't read anything since I read Archie, when I was a kid. I'm like, well, there's a lot more than that now. And they get surprised sometimes when they see, I was going to read comic books with my kid, but I cannot read this comic with my kid. No, you can't. It's just like movies. You can't watch every movie with your kid. You can't read every comic with your kid. And but they have the ones that have great attitudes are fantastic. And then there's a small percent of those who come in, they're like, I came here for this class. This is the class. It's the only reason I enrolled in this program. I want this class, right? And I'm like, yes, you are mine, right? So, and of course, then I teach them, it's all about writing. It's not about the art. We do talk about art because you can't do comics and not
Right.
talk about art. But I teach them both the Marvel method and the full script method that DC uses. Right? They don't own them anymore, but
Yeah.
a lot of them get confused about the Marvel method. They don't understand how it works. But I get to, it's fun. I get to talk to them about things like splash pages and panels and page turners and double page spreads, and a lot of these terms, 90% of my students don't even know what they've never heard of them before. So, and a lot of times I get to introduce them to, things like Bone. A lot of them have never heard of Bone. And I don't know if you've ever read Bone, but
I've not read it, but I'm aware
of it. Really good. Yeah, really good. So I get to introduce them to a medium that many of them have no experience in.
So mentioning things like Bone, what particular comics in general do you introduce to them to? Are there particular particular graphic novels that are kind of, these are ones you need to know about, or are there certain ones that you go, this is one that I actually make all my class read?
Yeah, I wish that were the case. Now, where I teach, we cram a semester's worth of content into 4 weeks, and
wow. Okay.
I have two textbooks, and one of them is Scott McCloud's Understanding Comics, which I do tell them this is the one book you need to have read if you intend to work in the comic book industry, because everybody knows it, right? Mm-hmm. The other book I use for my textbook. I thought I actually might have them around here. I don't. Is the DC Comics Guide to Writing Comics by Denny O'Neil.
Okay.
It's very, very good. Denny O'Neil was certainly a very brilliant writer, fantastic editor on Batman. There's a lot of really good content on storytelling in Denny's book. And this is one of the things I try to focus on for them, because a lot of them are they're intimidated by the format. It's like, well, it's drawing pictures. It's like, it's still a story. You're still telling a story. You still got to engage me. You still got to have interesting characters. You still got to have all these things that you have in a non-illustrated story. And so Denny O'Neil covers a lot of stuff. So those are my two textbooks. Unfortunately, because the school doesn't allow me to have a budget for anything else, we are limited to reading free comics. And so the only thing that I can give them are a couple of sites that have free viewings, because it has to be so like, you couldn't say, hey, I own this book, I want to read it. It's like, well, no, all your classmates can't read it too. So it has to be available for the entire class to read. And they tell me the reason for that is because at some point in time, some students were like, well, he read this and that, and I don't have access to that, so he got a better education than I did. So, we live in that day and age where everything has to be available to all of them. Yeah. So sometimes, friends of mine in the independent market will say, hey, you are welcome to use this comic book. And then I can supply that to them for free because I have permission to do so. But most of the time we go to digital sites that contain free comics.
Gotcha.
And so we usually talk about some. I try to talk about some of the pivotal books in the industry. I've written them there's a history lecture of comics in which I touch on some of the things in comics history. We talk about the middle 80s, where you had the Watchmen, you had the Dark Knight Returns, and you had Crisis on Infinite Earth. That's the same year that Dark Horse launched. So I do make them aware of some of the more pivotal works. Mouse, of course, was published that same year.
Oh yeah.
And so they read Mouse in an earlier class. So they come to my class having they come to my class having read 2 books in the program. They've read Mouse, and they've read a book called a children's book called Awkward that they do for the children's writing. There's a children's writing class, so they read it in that class. And I usually try to encourage them to do searches when they're looking for, because they have to do a presentation on a graphic
Mhm.
novel. They read throughout the month. They read comic books, right? And then
Yeah.
it's the last week they have to read a graphic novel. And
Okay.
so I usually walk them through the process of saying, look, just go to Google, and if your favorite genre is science fiction, just Google top science fiction graphic novels, and it's
Mhm.
going to give you a list right there. You know, Saga comes up a lot. Why the Last Man comes up some. My recommendations would almost always be from the 70s. If they're asking me, well, you should read, you know, the Craven's Last Hunt was the 80s. When Craven's Last Hunt for Spider-Man, you know,
Oh yeah.
or you should read the Mantis story from the Steve Englehart wrote for the Avengers, right?
Mhm.
Jim Starlin's The Death of Captain Marvel,
Oh
right?
yeah.
Brilliant graphic novel. So whenever they ask me for recommendations, it has a tendency to be a little bit less modern.
Yeah. So, with that in mind, what are a couple of you think are kind of must reads? If there's somebody who's a comic book fan, maybe they're younger, so they haven't had the experience that you and I have had over
Mm-hmm.
the decades. What do you think are like maybe 3 or 4 must read either graphic novels, because a lot of the collected separate issues of a
Mm-hmm.
story are now built into graphic novels,
Right.
or a story series that you're like, this is something everybody should to try to get a hold of and read.
Yeah. Well, I think the 86, 87, that was a watershed year. That was kind of the year that we went from sort of the PG-13 mentality to everything needs to be dark and gritty
Mhm.
and bloody, right? That said, I think probably if I were to recommend what you need to have read if you want to work in comics, Watchmen.
Mm.
Now, I don't think that I don't know if you read Watchmen lately, but some of the language doesn't hold up.
Yeah,
You
I,
know,
I actually reread it maybe 2 or 3 years ago.
yeah, it's still good, but it's not like it was when you and I read it on the shelf, right?
Yeah,
Because
it,
it was
it's not as shocking based on the world we live in today.
No, it's not. And but it was and the Dark Knight Returns. Those were game changers. You
Oh
know,
yeah.
and Mouse. Um, I think they need to read Mouse to be. So there's a couple of reasons, right? I think they need to read Mouse in order to see what comics are capable of, right?
Mm,
Because I think a lot of people think, well, comics are Spider-Man and Batman,
right.
listen, I love Spider-Man and Batman. I'm not saying that's not, once you read Mouse, you realize, they're capable of a lot more than just Spider-Man and Batman, right?
Yeah.
I think Dark Knight Returns is important because it shows what you can do with a property that's been around for a long time and can be treated in a serious way, and yet you can still read it. It's not. It's been a couple of years since I've read it, so if you might correct it, I don't remember anything R-rated in the book. Um, I don't think it was for mature readers. Um,
I mean, other than maybe some graphic violence in it, some of the images,
yeah, yeah.
maybe.
I know
But outside
Watchmen.
of that, I don't recall. I mean, Watchmen
Yeah.
has some
Yes.
sexual content that people need to
Right.
be aware of.
Yes.
If that
Absolutely.
is an issue for you, be aware. Um,
Yes.
and
Absolutely.
that's something that I was going to either say, in my other recording at some point during this
Yeah.
podcast,
It
I
does.
was
It
going to
does.
mention
Yeah.
it. But so we'll mention it here.
And certainly I know that when I read it in '86, it was shocking.
Oh,
Some of that
absolutely.
was very, very shocking. Ooh,
Well, and I mean, not. I mean, can you have a spoiler for a book that's 40
I don't
years
think so.
30
I
40
don't think
years
so.
old now?
Yeah.
I mean,
No.
I mean, one of the big cruxes of the Watchmen story is an issue of sexual assault.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. So it does kind of need to come with warnings.
Yeah.
But I don't think the Dark Knight Returns was that way, because you got to remember
No, I don't think so.
still a DC book, right? I mean, this
Yeah.
is Watchmen was too.
As I recall, the Dark Knight Returns, the maybe the more shocking parts are the any graphic violence images, because it may have been a little stronger artwork than maybe some other than the general Superman comic book at the time.
Yeah. But I think it's important because, I think that I'm of the belief that I think that we should try, as entertainers, we should try to make our work as accessible to all as possible.
Yeah.
Right. And part of the reasoning behind that is why would you like all right, so I know I'm going to get a lot of barbs for this, probably from some of the listeners. It's like, why would you make, people always argue with me. It's like, why would you make Deadpool rated R? Well, you have to make Deadpool rated R. I'm like, no, you don't. You really don't. You can do Deadpool without being rated R.
Yeah.
It's like, what? No, you have to. I was like, no, you don't. Deadpool existed without being rated R for about a decade, and he did just fine, right? Yeah. There's a lot of that, a lot of the R, in my opinion, a lot of the R-rated stuff that's just gratuitous, right?
Yes,
and it's just a writer saying, hey, look, I'm going to put this in here because I can, right? Mm-hmm. I'm of the opinion that your imagination, my imagination, the imagination of the reader is much stronger than what an artist can actually draw. If I'm going to draw, let's just say, if I'm going to have, let's just say, a rape scene, right? That I want to communicate, this is tough, this is hard. I don't need to graphically show that to communicate that to you. Yes. I can suggest shadows and closed doors, or there are things that I can do without showing that graphically to let you know what's happened. And the thing about it is, in your imagination, because you can't see it, you're imagining what's happening. And in your mind, it's awful, nasty, horrible stuff. Now,
in some of the best horror movies,
yes,
we barely see the monster.
Right. That's it.
And that's almost more frightening than
absolutely
than just showing it outright.
Because your imagination is different than mine.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's the same kind of thing. There are so many other ways you can communicate this horrible thing has happened without actually showing this horrible thing.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. As far as anything, I'm a big fan of. I've always loved Spider-Man. Spider-Man's one of my favorites. There's so many Spider-Man stories I think that I would recommend, but probably at the top of my list, because you can get it in the trade now, is Craven's Last Time.
Yeah, that's a good one.
It's a very, very good story.
Are you a big X-Men fan?
Not huge. I read X-Men. Of course, I read the Claremont.
The Claremont.
The Claremont Burn stuff, yeah. And I read through probably just a few issues post Jim Lee, when he left to start Image. I probably read a few of them and then just kind of lost interest in it. I can only remember who was writing it at the time. I don't think it was Claremont, but I don't remember
either. Yeah, some of my favorite comics ever are the Claremont Burn.
Those good.
Such a great combination. Great artwork, good stories. Sometimes they were a little off the rails, but
yeah. Claremont was famous for dropping stories that he just never returned to. He had put in a subplot, and then you're like, what happened to this thing that was 3 issues ago? And he just forgot about it.
Well, let's get into something a little more recent here.
Okay.
So you are in the middle of kind of a resurgence. You've
Yeah,
got a Kickstarter happening.
I do.
Talk to us a little about what this is, how this all started, why your wife said it was okay to do comics again.
Yeah, yeah. Um, yeah. So the beauty of it is, somewhere between the time I lost a lot of money and before the time I started, just before I started writing again, I became a believer, and it took a few years for me to sort of get the message from God, and talking with my wife, he's like, dude, and I think Jesus might call me dude, right? Like, dude,
I'm good
I
with it.
I gave you the gift to tell stories with the intent that you use them for me.
Hmm.
You didn't do that the first time. I'm telling you, you need to try it again.
Hmm.
And so, after some struggling with that, because I looked at the thing about publishing and probably movies and stuff like that too, is that never goes away, right?
Hmm.
You can look at my body of work, stuff that I wrote, of course, from my BC era, and I don't think that you will see, God reflected in that work. And that's something that I can never take back. That's something that
Hmm.
I never change. And I really, really struggled with that when I became a believer, because I'm like, how can I ever, convince anyone that I'm a follower of Christ when they read this?
Hmm.
And I had a wise pastor. He said, dude, well, he didn't say dude, probably. He probably said brother. He said, brother, you don't understand. That's perfect, because that's a demonstration of who you were. The new stuff you do is a demonstration of who you are.
Hmm.
And I'm like, man, that's why you're the pastor. Um, so I did my exploration with it. The first thing I did was I wrote a novel, and it was published and was out. I think it's still available on Amazon. I don't really know. I think it's only available in the Kindle versions now.
Okay.
It started off as one thing, but it became another thing. It really sort of became a love letter to my wife. It got a little bit of science fiction in it. Time travel. I'm a big time
And what's
travel.
that? What's that called?
It's called Buying Time.
Buying time. Okay.
Buying Time. Yep. And so after some talk with my wife, she read a book by a guy by the name of Bruce, the Dream Giver, Bruce something Wilkinson, maybe, I can't remember.
Okay. Yeah.
But she came to me and she said, I don't need to be someone who I need to be an encourager for you. You're my husband. I need to be an encourager for you. And so we talked a long time about it. I said, well, she goes, I know you love comics. I said, I do. And she said, so here's the deal. Why don't we'll come up with some money, and we'll get some money. Here's the money. And this is the money that you have. You can make comics as long as this money lasts. And this is the money that you have, right? If it grows, it grows. You can't pull from, our food budget or anything like that. But if it grows, it grows. But once you run out of money, you're done making comics, right?
Hmm.
And so I'm like, that's fair enough. So it really came down to, as long as I don't lose money, I can keep making comics, right?
Hmm.
And that's what happened. And then I discovered Kickstarter, right? And this is
Okay.
probably 2014, something like that, 15.
Okay.
And I said, well, there's a way for me to generate some money and help me, get the books printed and done,
Yeah.
and so that I can maintain this little nest of money that I have, and that is kind of the way that it's been. So here's the difference. So this time, as we began to do this, she saw that it was different. That my writing was different. The kind of stories that I'm telling in my writing is different. It's that my BC my AD life is now reflected in the writing, and she's got on board with it. She's wholly on board, and she does a lot of the social media for me. She
Okay.
she actually does a lot with me. She's my partner, and so that was kind of how it's just like, as long as you don't lose money. And so I started doing comics, and praise be where it belongs. I've operated in the black since then, and have managed to do, since we started Silverline again, we've done about 40 comic books.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
So
Yep.
so that you've been doing this for a little while now.
Yeah, we started in so we started just before the plague streaming, but now I didn't write them all, so I want to be clear with that. But here's a stack of them.
Oh wow.
That we've done since then. So I don't know if it'll flip through the covers easily. If I can do that. Yeah,
Very
you can see
cool.
there's just a whole bunch of stuff here. Now the one you might see right on top here is Cat and Mouse. I mentioned Cat and Mouse early. So one of the things that I experienced going to conventions is I would go to a show and I would have I have a new book, and people would say, "So what are you bringing about Cat and Mouse?" What are you bringing about Cat and Mouse? And I kept saying, "Well, I wrote this thing here. You can buy it. I'm the same guy who wrote it, right?" So, long story short, I decided to bring back Cat and Mouse. This is what we're actually kickstarting is issue number 4 of volume 2. So,
Okay.
Yep. So it's not the same characters. The thing about it is, I beat my brain to trying to say, okay, look, it's been nearly 30 years since the first series appeared. Am I going to have 60-year-old characters? Am I going to ignore the fact that time has passed and just plop them in? So I decided that the first Cat and Mouse volume, issue number 18, it ended. There was an end to it.
Okay.
They were geographically in a different location from where the story took place. And so I just decided I'm going to leave them there. They're done. They're through. They're finished. They're no longer the characters, right? We can speculate about what's going on with them. I don't know. That's another story, maybe. But so I took 2 brand new young characters and created this volume 2 with them. My focus has been on human trafficking. The story is set in New Orleans, and my pitch for it is Brett gets a call one day from his ex-fiance that says, "Hey, my kid sister ran away. Would you go get her and bring her home?" It's his ex-fiance, so he doesn't really want to do it, but he's studying to be a police officer, so he says, "Let me see what I can do." So he goes to New Orleans only to find out that the kid's sister has been caught up in a human trafficking ring. So he has to figure out how to get her out of the human trafficking ring and get her home. And yes, there are ninjas involved.
Always good thing to have ninjas.
Always good to have ninjas, yeah. So readers of the first volume will see a lot of familiar characters because I kept a lot of the secondary characters. I did some of that. I just ignored time, right? And there is an acknowledgement of time having passed, but I'm not going to say it's been 2 years, it's been 20 years. I'm just going to say some time has passed, right?
Yeah.
But but if you didn't read the first volume, you don't need to have read it, right? Because there are 2 brand new characters are coming in and they're doing, they're doing what they do. So we are kickstarting issue number 4. That means though that you can get issues 1, 2, and 3 if you're like, hey, I'm just now hearing about this. I missed issues 1, 2, and 3. You can get the whole thing. It's not in a collection yet, so you're still buying, the floppies.
Individual.
We will do a collection, but that's going to be after this, and not immediately after this either. It's we'll give some time, but yeah. So this ends the first miniseries, and I'm already into the second miniseries, which would. Technically, so some of my fans were telling me I need to keep legacy numbering, and I get it, but I don't know. Whenever you go to comic shops, they like the new number 1s.
Yes. Oh yeah.
A new number 1 sells better than a number 5. So so I'm not that inclined to do that at this point, and it's simply for that reason, and I get it. I understand the desire to have a number 5, But yeah, but by number five, my next number one, I'm already the penciler has already done. I want to say 13 pages of it.
Oh wow.
So yeah, so we're moving right along.
Anybody we might recognize working on the book with you?
So the first issue, so you'll see covers actually by Dean Zachary. Dean Zachary is the guy who, if you're familiar with my Malibu work, Dean Zachary drew the Ferret. He drew
Okay.
some of the issues of Nightman,
Okay.
and let's see who else. Roberta Conroy is coloring it. She was one of the Malibu colorists.
Okay.
Yep. Let's see who else. Barb Kalberg is inking it. She inked a whole bunch of stuff at Malibu back in the day, so she's the inker.
It's like a Malibu reunion over there.
Well, the funny thing about it is very much is the first gaggle of folks that kind of got the ones who sort of pushed me into it were all ex Malibu. Dean Zachary, Kevin Gallagly was the first guy who was attached as colorist, and Barb Kalberg. Kevin Gallagly was a Malibu colorist. Of course, Dean did Ferret, Nightman. Barb inked a whole bunch of stuff. They were all ex Malibu people, and they're like, dude, you need to. They're the ones who kind of pushed me into it, along with the assistance from my wife. So yeah, it's not unusual that I reach out, and in fact, I can't tell you who because it's still a bit mum. But based on here's what I'll give you some really good hints. Based on the titles that you sent me, I think that you might be very interested. Who is actually going to be doing a story with me and Silverline soon? It has not been announced yet.
Very cool.
My team doesn't even know who it is, so I can't tell you for that reason. But I think you might be very interested in that. And he's going to be doing a 3-issue miniseries for me. So
well,
I'm very excited about
definitely keep my eyes peeled for that.
It's definitely a Malibu connection. I will say that.
Very cool. Well, before I ask my last question, which is how people can find you, how is your faith playing into what you're doing right now? Would you call these faith-based comics, or are these just comics that happen to be written by a guy who's a believer?
The second option, let's see. So here's my thing. When I got back into comics, and of course, I mentioned my struggle. When I got back into writing, I said, my thing is this. I don't, because we talked a little bit off air, and I saw some product that I looked at as faith-based or as Christian product, and I looked at it and I said, I don't think the content is or I don't think the quality is where it ought to be. I think there was a lot of good hearts involved, but I would look around and I would say, this is kind of what people think about when they think of Christian entertainment, and I believe it ought to be better than that, right? And I also think that people, if I were to come to, a lot of people are turned off. If you say, "Oh, this is a Christian comic book," well, I'm not a Christian. I'm not going to read it, right? We could probably talk for hours. I could make some arguments that Spider-Man, that Captain America, that a lot of these heroes embody Christian elements, particularly early on, right? I don't know so much. I don't read really Marvel DC today, but early on, there was so much of that Christian element embodied in their character. And so I decided what I really want to do.
That moral compass.
Yes,
I actually had an apologetics guy who wrote a book about how you can find Christian faith ideas in a lot of the heroes we see in movies.
Yeah.
And I asked him the question. I said, why do you think that these secular writers still tell these stories that have such faith-based moral ideals built into them? And his basic comment was, they can't help themselves because God has made us. We're made in his image, whether they like it or accept that idea or not.
Wow, awesome.
It's built into part of who we are, that
Yeah,
we see these moral lines, and we can't help but express that when we
yeah.
share these stories.
Awesome. Awesome. I love that answer. Yeah. So my hope is that whenever someone reads something that I've written, they're not gonna. It's not a gospel track, right? But when they close the book, they'll say, I can see Jesus in that. It's
Mm.
not a story about Jesus. It's not a story about God. But if as a believer, and you read it, you're like, I can see the elements you have in there. Those who may not know Christ, they may not see it as faith elements as much as they see the good versus bad, or something
Mhm.
like that. But I decided that I wanted in any of the things that I wrote to have. I want it to all point there. The
Yeah.
sports guys, when they score a touchdown, they point up. And that's kind of what I want my writing to do. When you've read something, I want you to close it and go, huh, cool. I see the writer pointing up.
Yeah.
I make the argument that I think some of the all-time best quote unquote Christian entertainment is Little House on the Prairie. Are you familiar with that show at
Oh,
all?
very. My
Yeah.
mother loved that show.
Yeah.
So I was forced to watch that show because I'm
Well,
old enough that we only had 3 channels and
right.
1
Yeah.
TV. Um, and I had to go outside of the trailer and turn the
And
antenna
turn. Yeah.
so that we
Yep.
got better reception.
Of
So
course. Yeah. Yeah. My dad used to stick it. We had, the knob. My dad had a pencil in it because we had a little. It was loose, and so sometimes that pencil would get fuzzy, and we'd have to go adjust the pencil.
uh,
But
all of my younger audience is like, "What are you talking about?"
I know, right? An antenna. What knob on what? Yeah. So part of my argument is this: if you ask anybody what Little House on the Prairie is, they'll tell you it's about a family. In the I think it's 1870s.
Something like
In the
that.
pioneer family in the
Yeah.
Americans, right? But I would argue that it's not just that. It's about a family of believers
Hmm.
who live in the prairie. What happens? They're telling a story. Paul gets in a fight. And Ma says, now, Paul, that ain't the Christian thing to do. And Paul says, you're right, Ma. I guess I got to go apologize. And he goes in and makes it better because that's what
Yeah.
a believer ought to do. It's not about it doesn't preach to you. It's just about a family of believers who live their life, right?
Yeah.
And that's kind of the way I want my work to be. I want it to be.
Very
I
cool.
want you to say, "Hey, I'm reading about this dude and this girl who are fighting human trafficking, and you know what? This dude is a believer, and I can see his struggles as he tries to fight human trafficking. Right?
Mm.
Yeah. So that's kind of my hope.
Very cool. I am right there with you. I love seeing good, positive entertainment that has good Christian moral ideals, but isn't necessarily overtly,
Right.
faith-based in the
Right.
grand scheme of things.
Yeah.
I think Christians can have good entertainment that
Mm.
doesn't have a altar call at the end.
I agree 100%. 100%. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, then let's wrap up here. First, how can people find your Kickstarter?
It's super, super easy. You go to silverlinecomicscrowdfunder.com.
Awesome.
That will take you right to it. silverlinecomicscrowdfunder.com. No spaces, just one long silverlinecomicscrowdfunder.com.
And if people want to follow you, keep up with what you're doing or what the company is doing, social media wise or whatever, how can people find you and Silverline?
So same. We're on all the social medias. I think there's probably a new one or two that we haven't been able to join yet, but we try to stay on all the social medias. So you can, if you're whatever social media you're on to find me. You can look for Roland Mann. I usually have a character. It looks just like me, even to the glasses. But that's kind of how it looks. But I add the glasses. Caricature, I should have said, not a character. Caricature. So you can find me on all the social medias, or you can find Silverline Comics on all the social medias. And we would absolutely, and I would absolutely appreciate your follows and your likes and all that kind of stuff. So, yeah.
Awesome. Well, Roland, it has been fantastic having you on the show today. So
I have been
glad
fun.
that we were able to connect.
Same here. I'm glad you found me. It was fun.
It was great connecting with Roland and hearing his journey. Make sure you check out the links in the show notes down below and follow Roland and Silverline Comics, and make sure you support his Kickstarter. Well, that's all I have for you today. Don't forget to like, subscribe, follow, click all those links down there, whatever they are, so you can keep up with the new content as it's released. You can find all of our social links and links to our YouTube channel and our online store at ChristianNerdsUnite.com. If you enjoy the show and want to help even more, consider becoming a supporter on Patreon. All of our Patreon levels have great benefits and make a huge difference in the ministry we're able to do. Supporters will also get to hear exclusive stories of believers we're serving around the world through our ministry partners. To check it out or partner with us, go to patreon.com/ChristianNerdsUnite or ChristianNerdsUnite.com and click support in the menu. And don't forget to check out ChristianNerdHQ.com for more great podcasts. Before you go, I do want to leave you with this blessing from Romans 16:25-27. Now to him who is able to establish you in accordance with my gospel, the message I proclaim about Jesus Christ, in keeping with the revelation of the mystery hidden for long ages past, but now revealed and made known through the prophetic writings by the command of the eternal God, so that all Gentiles might come to the obedience that comes from faith. To the only wise God be glory forever through Jesus Christ. Amen. We'll see you next week. Blessings.
Hey